Hello fellow bike people. Now, I've talked a lot about the two charities or non-profits that I'm working with right now, and that's Mississauga Cycles and the GLE Movement. Now, Mississauga Cycles, they're still in the process of getting back up and running for the year, so I haven't done anything with them yet this year. The GLE Movement, on the other hand, been doing lots of work with them. So this time on Project Use Bikes, I want to talk about what I've been doing with them, and I want to show you a bit more detail on one of the bikes that I tuned up for them. I'm going to show you how to clean up old chrome when it's starting to get a bit rusty and nasty, because there is a trick to it, and it's actually pretty easy. The work with the GLE Movement, that really ramped up last weekend. So before that, I donated the bikes that I mentioned in the last episode of Project Use Bikes, but this time I went out and did some repairs on site. Now Janice, the teacher who runs the GLE Movement, she had lots of bikes left over from last year that were in a bit too rough shape to donate. There was either something obviously damaged or they were so far out of tune that they weren't rideable. Now just on that first night I fixed, I didn't actually count, but it must have been around a dozen bikes, and they were all fairly basic, but I got them all running fairly nicely, so they're gonna serve their new owners well. Now Janice and I have been going back and forth on Instagram a little bit, like she runs the GLE Movement's Instagram account, of course. I'm taking a few screenshots of our back and forth in our stories, so I'm gonna share a few of those. Now the last of those pictures, that silver one, you saw that bike? That thing's pretty shiny, right? It looks like a proper old school BMX, like something from the 80s. It's not. It's a Diablo, which is some department store brand from, I'm gonna guess, the 90s or the early 2000s. It's designed to look like a proper 80s BMX bike, but it's not really built for quality. It's more built for show. So when I got this thing up in the work stand, inspection's the first thing. Every time you tune up a bike, you gotta inspect it before you do any real work. And my main conclusion was, all the parts are messed up, everything needs work. The only thing that was really good was the bones, so like the frame, the fork, the bars, everything like that. That was all perfectly solid. What you just saw there was me doing a bit of disassembly and checking everything, and from there I saw that all the bearings were loose. The rims on the wheels were so far out of true that I wasn't even sure I could get them rideable. The brake cables were really sticky, again to the point where I wasn't even sure I could get them running nicely, and there was a ton of just cosmetic and a bit of structural rust. So for the most part, the tune-up went pretty much better than expected. All the parts were more or less functional, save one or two. But the truing on these wheels, getting the wheels fixed, this was borderline shameful what I had to do to them. Check this out. Normally, if you have to take a hammer to the wheels, it's not worth fixing. But you know what? They got straight enough that I could have them clearing the brake with a relatively even spoke tension. The tire's still seated nice, so they're fine. They're gonna run. So now here's the fun bit. This is the bit I'm hoping you'll find really interesting. Getting the chrome all nice and shiny again. Because if you looked at the before shots, the frame was pretty ugly with the amount of rust it had. That did not look good. But the secret weapon for getting this stuff clean is SOS pads. After you get the whole thing scrubbed down with an SOS pad, which are little steel wool pads with the blue soap in them, you hit it with a nice citrus degreaser, wipe it all down, and then a silicone polish. The stuff I used was Pedro's Bike Lust, as always, but you can use Mother's or Armor All or like an automotive polish, and it'll work just as well. Last thing on this bike that was an oi was the drivetrain, the chain and freewheel. Fitting a new chain is always quick and easy enough, so I fit a new chain, but when I stepped on the pedals, I realized that freewheel was completely stripped out inside. Like, it had enough tension that it kind of worked in the stand, but once I tried to ride it, it just pedaled loosely, like this. Obviously I had to replace the freewheel, but get this, I could not find the correct tool. I know I have the tool somewhere, I just could not find it. So I pulled out one of those little like home repair tricks, the things that I consider to be true bike hacks. So if you have a single speed freewheel that's threaded onto a hub and you don't have the tool that fits in to remove it, you can usually get away with crushing the freewheel to the point where it jams itself shut and then using a vise to just twist everything off. The hub threads usually survive just fine, and in this case, they did perfect. But, oh, this was so much work to get off. But in my opinion, it was worth all the work. Now that everything's working properly and it's got the fresh drivetrain parts on there, all the bearings are tightened, this thing runs pretty nicely. And it looks pretty damn good, I must say. It's got that old school aesthetic, it's got that nice shiny look. It's pretty cool. I really like this bike. Now at the same time, I also did a second bike, which was a Mongoose BMX, a department store level one. But apparently some of the students involved with GLE had been requesting that it get built up so they could ride it. I didn't bother filming it because it wasn't quite as interesting. I basically just popped some wheels on it, popped a chain on it, and it's good to go. I went for kind of an old school look on it, and that works perfectly fine because I didn't have a proper U-brake for the back end, but that's an old BMX wheel set from the 80s that it has on it now. It's actually a Shimano coaster brake hub that it has. So it's got the back pedal brake in the rear and the hand brake in the front. 2 brakes means it's perfectly safe. Now it does have a little bit of frame damage. There's some dents in the rear seat stay, but I sanded all of the paint off it, made sure there was no actual cracks, and the whole frame is still perfectly aligned, so realistically, as long as the bike's not doing any crazy jumps or stunts, which most of it's not built for in the first place, I think it's going to be perfectly safe to ride. Now, when she picked up those 2 bikes, Janice dropped off another 9 bikes that still needed work. Some of them were ones that I couldn't get finished while it was on site the other day, and some of them were ones that had been dropped off by students. They had picked them up last year and they'd developed problems with the bike since then, like things needed repair, things were broken, and they all just in general needed some love. So as it stands, out of the 9 bikes, I've got 7 tuned up right now. They're all running really nicely. Again, nothing fancy aside from one Bianchi, really nice Italian bike, that one stands out. But they're just good commuter, play around the neighborhood, ride with your friends type bikes, which is exactly what they're designed for, it's exactly what they're going to be used for. Now, of the 2 bikes that are left, one of them I'm just waiting on some parts, but it's not a particularly exciting repair, so I don't think I'll be filming it for an episode of this series. But the other one, you're gonna see that next episode. It's a project bike that didn't quite work out. The frame is pretty good. I think I'll be able to build that up into something nice, and I want to use it to explore the concept of wheelie bikes versus BMX bikes. Because they're very similar, but they're actually 2 different categories of bikes. And yes, you can use a BMX for wheeling, it's totally reasonable to do that. The design cues between them and the build cues, the setup, all of that's just that little bit different, so I want to explore that a little next episode. Now to finish off this episode, I want to show you some of the bikes that have gone to their new homes already. This is the whole point in what I'm doing with Project Used Bikes and what I'm doing spending my time volunteering with GLE and Mississauga Cycles. I wanted to spread the love of bikes, spread that joy of riding around, getting a bike, just riding around the neighborhood with your friends. It's one of the best feelings out there, and it's something that kids need these days. So here are some of those bikes with their new owners. Obviously no faces because they're high school students and I don't know them personally. Sorry, last couple things before I end the video, really this time. First of all, anyone want to place bets as to whether or not I actually do that for the next episode of Project Used Bikes? Like that wheelie bike I was talking about? I don't know, something else interesting might pop up. We'll see next time. And last but definitely not least, I want to shout out to two really inspirational people in the bike world, Marley and Kailey Kornhauser. And you've all seen videos with my girlfriend Brianna in them. She's a huge fan of these two. They've really inspired her to step up her cycling to another level and explore new areas of the cycling world, new styles, new things. Now what they're really known for is a program called All Bodies on Bikes, which is essentially body positive inclusivity in cycling, which is an absolutely huge deal. It's something that's really important, needs to be talked about more, and something that I think the industry really needs to be able to sustain itself in the future. The bike industry needs to be much more inclusive in every way it can.